Okay, welcome all to the OASIS lunchtime talk series. Today we have a visiting speaker from University of Lincoln, UK. Just get in, yeah, no problem. Jussi is a senior lecturer in computer science.
Yes, games computing in computer science.
Right. Yeah. And Jussi is quite a pioneer in game design research. He's published books like Game Design Patterns with Staffan Björk already in 2004, and then Game Design Research in 2017 with Petri Lankoski. And coming to Tampere is to Jussi almost like, well, pretty much like coming home. Because I mean, Jussi has studied in Tampere and also worked for a long time for Nokia Research Center. But without further ado, Jussi, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Olli. And it is great to be here, and also thank you for inviting me to give a talk in this lecture series. It's a nice place to OASIS. This is always sort of an inspiring place to be. So today the topic is the sense of place in video games, and we are using Red Dead Redemption 2 as a sort of focal point for this exploration. And this is done by me, Jussi Holopainen, and my colleague Andrew Westerside. So I'm from Games Computing School of Computer Science. I come from game studies background, and Wes comes from drama and theater background. So that is also one of the things we want to do here, is that what kind of insights our interdisciplinary collaborations could bring forth, especially in relation to the sense of place in video games. And also that here's my email address there if you want to ask some questions. And so the case is Red Dead Redemption 2 by Rockstar Games. So how many of you have played the game? What? What? Okay. Luckily I have another deck of slides here. So I start with Tetris. Okay. So, because during this talk, so how many of you are thinking about playing the game? Oh, but anyway, you are going to enjoy this talk. I try to, let's say, keep the references minimal or the spoilers minimal. But, well, as you know, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a prequel for Red Dead Redemption that came out some years back, which is a sort of an reconfiguration of the Westerner ideal in a game format. Already Red Dead Redemption itself, that is from Rockstar Games, so it's a sandbox game, and set in Red Dead Redemption, it is beginning of 20th century, sort of southwest. In Red Dead Redemption 2, it is before that, end of 19th century southwest. And both of them that they use a lot of tropes from Westerners, from other media, from comic books, novels, short stories, and especially from film. And that is also one of the themes which I will talk a little bit more later. But I do say that there are going to be some spoilers, so I hope I'm not going to, let's say, ruin your gameplay experience totally, even though I might try. And so here is the sort of an overview, is that, as I already mentioned, that we started to work with Wes on understanding games, and as he comes from the theater and drama, and especially from site-specific performances, that we were both interested in that how the place is formed in games and drama. And how we started this one was the sort of an interdisciplinary close reading of the game as a text. So it is that we played the game intensively and separately. So I come from games computing, Wes comes from drama and theater. So that we were first playing them as players. This is sort of trying to follow the Bichotki's and Tannenbaum's close reading of games as text. So we are playing them first as players, and then playing, replaying, and then also analyzing Let's Play videos and so on after as a researcher. And during this time that we were of course keeping notes and we were meeting each other on regular times in order to compare notes. But we also tried to keep our initial insights and initial analysis separate from each other in order to get as diverse views as possible. And of course we were sort of, let's say, theory agnostic in the start, but of course that during this playing and during this analysis and during these discussions with Wes, that these certain themes and certain theories and certain sensitizing concepts and models started to emerge. And much of this talk is based on that. What did we find as meaningful approaches for analyzing gameplays and game space in computer games? So this is also, as a sort of a warning, is that this is still a sort of a work in progress. So there are no definite answers, and then also there are a lot of things which we are scoping out from our analysis. We are trying to focus on the game, how plays or places that they manifest themselves in games, how games create the sense of place. But even though these then are how to include things like some parts of the narrative, some parts of the architecture, some parts of the how we are in the world, but we are also trying to scope out many things from narrative. For example, even though Red Dead Redemption 2 has a very disturbing, sometimes very disturbing moral dimensions to it, and then also implicit moral dimensions to it, that I'm scoping them out from this talk. That might be another talk. So first was that, as Wes comes from site-specific performances, was to sort of look into that. What is a site-specific performance, and what kind of concepts that could emerge from that field, which might be useful for this kind of an analysis. So site-specific performances is a performance conceived on the basis of a place in the real world, ergo outside the established theater. And this was as a valid starting point, that even though the game doesn't happen in the real world, but it has references to the real world events, even though they are still narrativized references and mediated references to the real world events. Another one is the place event, which is from McLucas. A place, what is built there bleed into each other and constitute another order of existence. And that is also what happens in the site-specific performances, is that the performance itself, it transforms also the place, not only that how we are perceiving the place and perceiving the people, perceiving the action and activity, the fictional activity in that place, but also gives us another sense of being in that place. The same happens, for example, in at least for me, in citywide live-action role-playing games or live-action role-playing games in general. Especially that if I LARP in an environment that I'm already familiar, but then that narrative or fictional frame of LARPing gives me a different way of being in that place. And then also as a sort of a difference between the activity, the audience, and the place, so the difference between the player and the spectator in the site-specific performances, but which is also sort of can be hijacked into analyzing the sense of place, especially in Red Dead Redemption 2 and other heavily narrative-based games, where you are also switching between being a player and switch to a spectator, like during cutscenes and so on. And the last one was, which comes from Tuan, who is a human geographer, is also that the difference between space and place. And the big difference there is that it is fundamentally a human difference. that the space becomes place at the point at which it's filled or woven through with human connections. So space is an abstract and empty, so to speak, and without, and if you have then the human connection, the human relations, the human intentions that are then embedded in that space, it becomes more of a place. And this is what I find as a sort of a difference between space and place is an extremely important one to understand, you know, when talking about games. Tetris, for example, can be argued that it is a space for play. It is an abstract space. And when you look at Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, then it is place because there is the human activity, the human connection is overlaid on that abstract virtual space of the game world in Red Dead Redemption 2. And then also, if you have some comments or questions during my talk, just please interrupt me. Just raise your hand, shout obscenities at me. And so from that space versus place, that then led to the sort of the indicators of placeness, how this human connection actually makes the place. And here we are following Nietzsche's video game Spaces from 2009, where Nietzsche argues that there are three main indicators of placeness: the identity, self-motivated and self-organized action, and traces of memory. And as you can see that these all start to be about the human connection between the space and the place. So in Red Dead Redemption 2, the identity, first of all, that there's you play Arthur Morgan, who's the guy second from right, and so that is the protagonist of and your avatar in the game itself. And he's part of the Van der Linde gang, and the rest of the people there. Dutch in the middle, that he's the leader. There's also John Marston, and now I forgot the name of the other people. Anyway, is that a lot of the identity which comes from during the gameplay is that you start to know more about the history of Arthur Morgan, the person that you are playing, your avatar. But it's also about the history and social relationships and the dynamics of the social relationships with the gang itself. Because gang is your family in the game. And they are forming background of how you are identifying or how Arthur Morgan is identifying them. So that is one part of the identity in Red Dead Redemption 2. And there's another one, which is that because it is a free, so it's a sandbox game, free roaming, and you are pretty much able to do anything you want to do. And then the identity comes from the players themselves. So it is you as a player who start to have the identity within the game world. And sometimes, or in my case often, that these two identities, there's a double agency of the scripted, the story narrative of the Arthur Morgan, or in a later game, spoiler alert, John Marston, is that there is the identity of that, the fictional identity of that character in the Red Dead Redemption 2 versus my identity with my player character, how I am using Arthur Morgan as a vessel for my own action activities and identities. And this clash is already interesting there. But in order to make the sort of the human connection with the place, you have to have some sort of an identity as an actor within that place. And here is that because there's also a strong kind of kinesthetic connection when you are playing to Arthur Morgan. There's some visual reaction to how you are controlling what Arthur Morgan is doing. And there you have quite a lot of freedom There are a lot of affordances in the game world, which gives you the sort of range of doing things. But then again, sometimes the game forces you to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, and they strip away your identity. They strip away your agency. And then the second one is the sort of the self-motivated, self-organized actions. Already referred that much of it is because it's a sandbox game, so you can. So it's for you as a player that you can have your own goals, that you can go where you want to do. There's a lot of freedom to express yourself through the play in that world, and that is very much about the self-organized, self-motivated actions there. Another layer of motivations comes from, of course, that you are following the storyline, you are giving quests and so on, which you can choose to do if you want to. And there's another layer of the organizing your own actions. And then there's layers of like there's achievement compendium systems. You can the game keeps track of how many animals that you have encountered and so on and so on. So that's for the player as a self-organized and self-motivated actions. But the more important, in my opinion, is that the NPCs who inhabit those places, the script writing and also the NPC behavior is done in such a way that you start to have an understanding that they have their own self-motivated, self-organized activities which are interrelated to each other in those places. So that is the human connection there. It gives an impression, an illusion of that these places are inhabited. And that is really what makes it a place. It seems that it's like teeming with, you have the NPCs with their own aims and desires and objectives. And so even that when going to the Saint Denis, which is one of the cities in the game, to the marketplace, there's the constant chatter of these people, the NPCs around, that they are just doing their everyday business. But that sort of human connection gives the sense of the place of a marketplace in Saint Denis in this fictional game. And also the NPC random encounters, that they are used. That the game is based quite a lot that there's a random encounter that you are riding to the sunset, and then there's a random encounter with an NPC on the roadside, and often in each of these random encounters that the narrative there gives information about the history of the place and the history of the NPC, and also the motives and desires and goals of the NPC. So all these intermeshed histories and activities and intentions and all goals and objectives and desires sort of form a network of humanness on top of that game world. And the last one is the traces of memory. Here again that they are, and this is from Saint Denis. There's one, and here's from Lemon swamps, and that these are fictional places. Saint Denis is a fictional town, but it has a lot of different references and anchor points to how, in this case, New Orleans in end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, is represented to us in many of the media. So it is the traces of memory here are that how we remember or how we perceive an existing real world place. And this is used as a backdrop for creating a sort of a depth to the sense of place in Saint Denis. And the same thing here is that the Lemoyne, but it has this Louisiana swamp style deep south swamps, which then trigger all these intertextual knowledge that we have about, or intertextual interpretations of what it is to be like in these places. And as mentioned earlier, that Red Dead Redemption 2 is heavily based on quite cliched sort of figures and devices and tropes from Westerners. And they are extremely recognizable. And then in Red Dead Redemption 2, that they are very much condensed into the space, so that it is possible actually to ride from the Rockies mountains to the Louisiana swamps in 10 minutes, which is the nature of game places in anyway. They are compressed, abstracted. And then another layer is the sort of the map and traces of your own activity, that you as a player. And a map is that it has a fog of war, and it also automatically gives you indicators of where you have been, what you have found, and so on. So the map is a sort of a memorabilia or a memory aid for reminding you of these places and where you can then, you are using your own memory in order to create a new and have a connection to these places. And the last one, which is sort of, this example is connecting the, and also and then this one is that this is a boilerplate which reminds of a Civil War battlefield. Even though that this is a fictional universe, there was no Civil War in the Civil War as the US Civil War, and there was no Bulgar Gate battle, but this is so much reminiscent of a Civil War battlefield, so it triggers those ones. It's also, the traces of memory is about traces of human activity in that place. And in the boilerplate is pretty much the most striking examples of traces of previous human activity in this place. It has been a battlefield. There's a lot of different anchor points for understanding that this has been a battlefield, which then invokes the memories of the Civil War and how you are perceiving the US Civil War, and also what are the sort of narrative dimensions there. Right. So any questions this far? No? Okay. So the next bigger picture was that site as a storyteller and site as a structure. And here we are following the Henry Jenkins so game design as a narrative architecture. So how many of you are familiar with Jenkins? Okay, good. So that Jenkins talks about 4 different strategies or 4 different approaches to game design as narrative architecture. So it's evocative spaces, enacting stories, embedded narratives, and emergent narratives. And one of the sort of key things for why Red Dead Redemption for me is such an interesting one, an interesting game, is that Red Dead Redemption is using all of these 4 in a very interesting and intertwined and sort of an interwoven way, which that they don't inhibit for other strategies there, but they support that each strategy, they support all the other strategies. So evocative spaces, first one is that what according to Jenkins is, and this is also what I talked about earlier, is that the representations of places that they are evoking tropes from Westerners. Here, Arthur is arriving in Valentine, which is one of the frontier cities, frontier towns in Red Dead Redemption 2, and which really reminds this one, the Once Upon a Time in West, the movie from 1960s. So it is about that you are then, it taps into this sort of a media cultural knowledge of what Western towns look like. And this is used a lot in Red Dead Redemption in different places. The next one is the sort of the enacting stories. And in this enacting stories means that you are playing out sort of a quite scripted storyline. And this one is from the chapter 1, Enter Pursued by Memory, which in which the Van der Linde gang that they are riding slowly through a snowstorm, trying to find shelter, being pursued by rival gang and law enforcement. And here it is that it tells a story that is that even though that you have the control of the character and you are writing there, but it's also that the background dialogue of the NPCs here, Dr. Van der Linden, this is a sort of introductory into the game world, is sort of that you are riding through the story, riding through the introduction to the story, the synopsis of the storyline, what happened previously, and that is also an entry point into the world of Red Dead Redemption 2. And also in sort of the quest line itself, that it forces you to do many things in a certain way. For example, it forces you to go and have a shootout in a certain Saint Denis manor house, and so on. And there you are using your player agency in order to achieve a certain kind of a game state, which is then advancing the storyline. Then embedded narratives, and in embedded narratives, what Jenkins means there is that you have pieces of narrative told through the environmental storytelling, or dialogue, or pieces of other kind of narrative, which are then scattered around the game places. And here, the sort of the micro quests, the random encounters, and all the dialogue, and all the narrative embedded within them, that they are slowly building a sort of a coherent understanding of what has happened in this game world before. And it's also slowly unfolding of different narratives which are happening, which gives you a better understanding, a better sense of place. So one of my, two of my favorite examples are, so that I was riding around and then I found an oil rig, an abandoned oil rig on the middle of the desert. So I went there and said, okay, what's here? And then I found a decomposed body there. And it had a letter which then indicated that actually that it was done by a sort of a hitman for a big Cornwall company, which is also a part of the main storyline. That they were that the oil rig owner was killed by the hitman because Cornwall, the company, wanted to buy the oil rig, and he didn't want to sell. And this is just a sort of a random encounter, but it still gives more depth to the Cornwall storyline. Another one was so I was just riding along there, and it was night time, and it started to rain, and then I saw a campfire by the road. So I went to the campfire, and there was a drunken old guy who was just rambling to himself and drinking more and more, and he was telling in a very drunken, rambling style of how he was forced to kill Indians in the Indian War where he was part of. And that encounter, there was a beautiful monologue there, not dialogue, until the guy that then passed out from drinking too much. But that gave me an understanding of the sort of strife between the US forces and the Indians there, because the Indians are also then part of the main storyline there. What is the plight of the Indians there? And especially the travel banter, that when you go, that when you're riding together with your members of the gang, that there's always dialogue going on between the members of the gang who are riding with. And they always give background information about the history of the place or the history of the characters. And all these things that they start to create the overarching fictional world. The last one is the emergent narratives, which means that the narratives that they come out, they spring forth from the player activities, and especially self-motivated player activities themselves. And Red Dead Redemption 2 gives a lot of space for that. It is a great place for exploration, great place for setting up your own goals. You can go hunting deer. You can also go and pillage helpless farmsteads if you want to. You can go and try to rob a train. You can go and try to rob a bank, or try to break into a jail and kill the sheriff. So these are all possible there, even though then the consequences of doing that usually often end up being that you are dead if you try to do something like robbing the jail. But it is that it allows you to tell your own stories. It allows you the activities which then end up being as stories. And then the sort of so one of the striking things there for us, for both me and Wes, was that that the concept of home, sense of belonging, was extremely strong, and that is also that it structured the game experience in a strong way. And here, that if you don't know the game, is that much of the things happen that the Van der Linde gang that you are part of, and they are on the run from both a rival gang and the law enforcement. And they set up camps. So the camp is the home, the camp is the homestead. The camp is the sort of the nexus of your existence, the nexus of your sense of belonging. And in the camp that you have the whole members of the Van der Linde gang, which is not only the outlaws, but their wives, their girlfriends, their children. And when you are in the camp, it also reveals through the dialogue between the NPCs and overheard dialogue between the NPCs that what are they doing, what are their social relationships, the social dynamics of your gang. And in addition, there is that the sort of the labor of upkeep is that you have to contribute to the camp logistics, that you have to earn your keep in the camp and help the camp to survive, help the camp to grow. And that is also that you can buy upgrades to the camp and so on, which also gives you it's a sort of a sense of home, the sense of that this is my place where I live. Even though I am free to roam the whole world, I always come back to the camp. And that is one way of, actually that is from the game design itself. Camp is the place mainly when you are able to then get new missions and also advance the story, the main storyline. So that is designed there in order to make the camp as a nexus. Even though the camp moves around during the gameplay, there are 4 different campsites, but that is still always the sort of the focal point of your belonging. And there's also the friction between the home and homelessness. It is the camp is your home, as Dutch Van der Linde in the beginning of chapter 2, the Dutch Van der Linde is the leader of the gang. When they are setting up the new camp, he says, "This is perfect for us, let's make it our home." And the home, referring to camp as a home, especially from Dutch Van der Linde, reoccurs during the dialogue often in the game. But at the same time, there's the sort of the sense of doom, the foreboding sense of homelessness there, which comes from that they are hiding, that they are running away from the law, they are running away from the advancing civilization, they are sort of how it was that they are so that they feel that they are left behind the advance of the civilization, that they are fighting against their way of life, which they know that they are losing. That's why they have to move. So that sort of friction of home and homelessness is an interesting one. And then the sort of the building part there is that, and here, for example, in one of the camp nights is that there's a bit of a celebration. So you go there, and this is the sort of it's your home around the campfire, your friends, your family around the campfire, and you are there as part of the home. And the most striking example of the home, and especially building the home, it comes in and now there's very strong spoiler alerts. In the sort of end section of the game, where you don't play Arthur Morgan anymore, but play John Marston, is that he wants to provide a home for his at the girlfriend and his son. And that sort of helping him to build a home for his family is a strong trope there. And it is that you really are going to build it, even though that from the gameplay point of view, building that home is like really stupid quick time events. But those things that they still reinforce the fact that you are building the home for John Marston and his in order to attract back his girlfriend and his son to become a family. And then that's sort of the how this sense of home then pervades the whole sort of an understanding how you feel about, how you sense, perceive, belong to the place in Red Dead Redemption 2. Because having those camps or having that sort of a nexus of belonging as a home you already built is that I was comparing it to Zelda Breath of the Wild. And what is the difference? Well, there are many other differences there. For example, that Zelda game world is fictional, totally fictional, even though it contains references to the previous Zelda ones. And in Red Dead Redemption 2, it has dense matrices of references to existing history and existing media, but also that the sense of in Zelda Breath of the Wild, it is much more free roaming. You don't have such nexus points or such focal points of sense of belonging in the Zelda Breath of the Wild. You sort of roam the Hyrule in comparison to Red Dead Redemption 2, where you have the camps and where you finally then, at the end, build a home. And the last one sort of goes to Edward Casey's that he has been talking about, sort of topopoesis and re-emplacement. And Edward Casey's, so in this case that we are using his representing place about landscape and maps, understanding landscape and maps, and he comes from the philosophical point of view that and topopoesis means creating a place. And I find that topopoesis, especially in the case of games, is a sort of extremely, well, I find it an interesting concept, and an interesting concept I'm going to pursue further. Re-emplacement means that for Casey, when he's talking about landscapes, landscape is way of re-emplacing you as a viewer, you as a being, into another place. And there, Casey argues that there are sort of 3 levels of topopoesis, the poetics of space. The first one is the place at, which is just like an exact topographical representation of a certain place, which is like an exact survey map of a certain place where there's not much that poetics around. Place of, which is that the place has gone through a representational transformation, while you still keeps the place as identifiable, and this relates especially to Casey's analysis of different kind of landscapes, that this landscape is better because it has these transformations, representational transformations, which reveal something more about the sort of spirit of the place. And the last one is the place for, which means that the representation is the place for your or the perceivers or the spectators' own activity. And in games, it is sort of it's a place for the activities of the play characters. But in Casey's case, it is that he argues for the place as contemplative sublime, to reveal the poetic truth of the place. And here you can, in the case of Red Dead Redemption 2, it can be argued that Red Dead Redemption 2, through all these home sense of belonging, all these solitary and structure, and especially the indicators of placeness here, that they all work together in a sort of the topopoesis, the creation of a place which reveals a poetic truth about something. In this case, it is that this poetic truth is not only a single truth, of course, but it is that it gives us sort of a poetic glimpse of human activities, the human history, the human plight, and also especially about especially related to the sort of Western frontiers in end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. But at the same time, this double poesis that it reveals something about us as human beings. It is very, Red Dead Redemption 2 is very human game. And then so for the sort of next steps, because I am fascinated sort of the double poesis, and then also I started rereading Heidegger after 15 years about the concept of dwelling in Heidegger and then also being in the world in Heidegger. And that's why the next steps in this journey is that understanding how all these things can be also used to understand the sense of place in. We are going to use at least some of these games in the next case studies, which is the King of Dragon Pass. How many of you have played the game? All right, where that it is a place for dwelling. It is a place for that. There's also the sense of home is very specific. Then Papers, Please, which is a totally different gameplay format to Red Dead Redemption 2 at least, and there is also the sort of using the media tropes to invoke the sense of place. In this case, it is the sort of an Eastern European 1980s totalitarian regime. And what is that? And what kind of a poetic truth does Papers, Please reveal through that creation of the sense of place? And this war of mine, which is again invoking very specifically historical place and events, but in a very different gameplay style. And then finally Zelda Breath of the Wild, where the double poesis has, in my opinion, very, let's say, different dimensions and different mechanics. All right, so thank you. Any questions, comments?
Since you brought up Heidegger, perhaps not a question, but a suggestion. You said that you used the Heidegger's concept of dwelling to understand that the camp is a sort of home for the gang and a nexus for the world, in a way. But and then you said that there is no such place in the Breath of the Wild, for example. Or did I misunderstand you?
Yes. That's, I think I sort of misphrased something. Is that in the dwelling, so that for Heidegger the dwelling is much larger than having a home or having a building.
Yes.
It is because it is for dwelling is how the Dasein is located in sense-making practices and structures, which it is familiar with.
Yes.
And then also is that for the sense of dwelling, that I argue that it is not necessary to have the sort of the sense of home or the nexus of belonging or nexus of being, but it does sort of bring it forth in a different way than in having a free roaming sense of dwelling as it is in Zelda Breath of the Wild. So there is sort of a different quality or different texture and different ways of bringing that dwelling to happen. And that's why also that like so even though that's like in King of Dragon Pass, that you don't have an you sort of have an avatar, but it's also that it is the sense of strong home as the sense of dwelling is different from Red Dead Redemption 2, even though there's the concept of home is there. If you catch my drift, home is not necessary for dwelling to happen. But if you have the sort of a home nexus of activities, it has a different quality or a different dimension of play. And that interests me. That what are the sort of the mechanics there?
Okay. Well, I was thinking about the origin of the work of art by Heidegger, where he presents the ancient Greek temple as a sort of, it is a place that opens up the world. I mean, he claims that the radiation of the sun isn't given us firstly as a radiation in a physical sense, but as something that shines off the temple. The temple is the thing that opens up the world. And the Breath of the Wild I haven't played any of these games you're using, but an example that I understand. In Half-Life 2, there is the tower that is always in the distance, but not before the end of the game, spoiler alert, you go into the tower. But I think that the tower, in a way, opens up the world throughout the game, and I don't think that it can be understood through Heidegger's dwelling, perhaps, in that much sense. But my suggestion is that the origin of the work of art may offer some alternative ways of using Heidegger to understand the meaningful human world in games.
Yeah, yes, I fully agree with that, because it's also that, for example, that the concept of dwelling, so as a Dasein located in a set of practices and so on, that's different from the concept of sort of the opening up the world in through Earth, or which is the world and Earth are the main concepts in the origin of the work of art in Heidegger, and that they are dealing with sort of this very preliminary thought that they are dealing with different aspects of how we understand the place and the world in games than the concept of dwelling, which is more of it is an end point of top of OASIS is the dwelling, as also the Heidegger says there that building is not the goal of dwelling. Dwelling is the goal of building. But this is very preliminary at the moment, and well, Heidegger is notoriously difficult to understand sometimes. So, any Heidegger experts around here?
I think Franz had a question.
Not a Heidegger expert, but thanks for the talk. Taking this discussion to a bit different direction, Red Dead Redemption is of course strikingly beautiful game. It has this kind of audiovisual quality that relies on the latest technology and progress made on modeling of different kind of natural phenomena and visual effects. How do you relate this kind of game phenomenological analysis with this kind of interpretations that have also approached digital games, particularly from the perspective of digital media studies? That what is the role of audiovisuality in this kind of analysis of topological qualities? The placeness in games. I'm particularly thinking about this kind of distinction that when we are talking about game environments and game worlds, there seems to be this kind of duality that you are analyzing them either as representational environments, modeling something, or as this kind of environments built for game agency, meaning basically that you could really use the visual cues to minimum, or basically make a text adventure, as long as you have this kind of elements that are there from a mechanical angle, the world would still be the same. How do you react to that?
Yes.
Yes.
So that is something that I've been struggling also with that one, and it is also it is that it's, let's put it that way, that that you are trying to achieve different kind of immediate aesthetics as aesthetics of perception, and then you have the sort of the aesthetics of agency, aesthetics of activity, and there are differences there, because you can achieve different things by focusing on different modalities of aesthetics. And in many of the games, especially in the Red Dead Redemption 2, where it has extremely high quality of everything, makes it sort of so let's say extremely high production qualities of in all of these, the sense of agency, the narrative world, the beauty of the rendition of the world in audio and visuals, and there are there are different dimensions there, and that's why you can create a meaningful, long-lasting place for or a vessel for dwelling, like in King of Dragon Pass, but it's a different texture of dwelling than in Red Dead Redemption 2. But I'm still struggling with that question. So do you have a quick answer to that one? Yeah, Tom.
Jussi, I was thinking that the latest, well, maybe it's not even the latest Dragon Age, but one of the Dragon Age games is like maybe an interesting example of your argument, because I can't remember, maybe it's Dragon Age 3, one where green stuff comes out of the sky. You have like a home and it gets destroyed, and it's a major plot point, and then you have to kind of escape and find this new stronghold. And it's done in a very interesting game kind of way, that it shows you kind of your loss and the kind of process of rebuilding this kind of stronghold in the center that has is a center for the actions and the resources and the kind of relationships in the game.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think was it Dragon Age?
Inquisition, that's what it's called. I remember now.
Yeah, the Dragon Age Inquisition. There's a sort of the strong concept of homeness, much more stronger than in Dragon Age 2, which was a railroad hack and slash, if I remember correctly.
And another one would be maybe The Witcher 3.
Yeah.
Because one of the add-ons in The Witcher 3, which is called Blood and Wine, literally features them building a house and farm, vineyard, as a kind of process of kind of phasing himself out of being a witcher.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think, a really strong theme to be examined around this and AAA games, and it's interesting. You're also taking it in other directions too. So that's one.
Yeah. So yes, that's good, because it is the sense of the sense of homeness, how that is manifested in games, and also like in Witcher 3. Or in the Witcher series itself, that we also have sometimes strong and sometimes less, because it is also used as a device to emphasize how you feel as being a Witcher. Are you part of the society, part of the community, or are you outcast? And that is the sense of home is used there, and that's a good point.
Okay, Jan had one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can take first.
Okay. Yeah. It's kind of like a personal question related to your own experience with the game. What do you think that were kind of like the most strongest narrative elements or narrative mechanics that create the sense, like strong sense of place? Or was there kind of like, okay, that this certain place in this game is like very emotionally strong for me because it is built through these narrative elements or mechanics or something like that? Did you kind of like map those out in any way, or?
Yeah. So some of the most striking ones. So it's sort of going back to the so where it's a combination of the evocative spaces. That gives a good reminder of that. Okay, this is a southwest slave plantation, and then also that's then the embedded narratives around it. That when you go there, you make these micro quests, and you also hear the random banter between the NPCs and so on. We start to create this really creepy feeling of that what it would have been meant to live in that plantation, especially as a slave. or or as a woman, because there's a strong narrative there about the suffragette movement, which is also happening as one of the narrative themes there. Spoilers, and which is that and so it's a combination of those ones and how they are crafted. That it's a beautifully crafted narrative, which then uses these different techniques there. So the most striking ones are that they are using all of the strategies there, and I think very carefully controlled way.
Well, continuation question. Was there places that you thought that were like weakly written or had like very weak narratives, or were kind of like
sort of one of the towns, what was the name, on the northeast coast, was sort of acted only as a backdrop for a random firefight. And that was so that, and so the big firefight which happened there didn't have a connection to the history of the place at all. And that's sort of a mismatch between the enacted storytelling and the embedded storytelling and evocative spaces was making it weak.
Okay, Elisa, have a question?
Yeah. Do you know, did Rockstar use any kind of historical real places or photograph as an inspiration, and does it matter from the perspective of your analysis?
So that I know that they use, and the same thing, for example, for also like Assassin's Creed or any other game studios that try to use sort of to give a sense of real places. That they heavily use photographic material. They also heavily use historical material. In the case of Red Dead Redemption 2, I think it was a massive amount of historical material they went to. If I remember correctly, I think it was Red Dead. Yeah, but yeah, that they do. Yeah, and it from this point of analysis. For the end point of the analysis, it doesn't matter that much. It's just good to know. But then for sort of further analysis of how does a top of OASIS work, then it is as a sort of technique or process or method of achieving that, then it is interesting. So when you go to game design research and not necessarily from the game experience research.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock, but I mean, if Jussi's okay with this, we can still take 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah, okay.
So I was wondering, since Red Dead Redemption 2 is taking place in time in the Old West, if we think of that setting essentially as the sort of grand national epic of the United States, do you think that the sense of belonging is also effectively delivered to like non-Western or non-white audiences? Or is the player experience somehow sort of dissonant or disconnected somehow there?
That's a good question, because it is so let's say I think it is very dissonant. It is going to be dissonant for if you're not familiar with the Western tropes used in Westerners, you are going to be at loss when playing Red Dead Redemption 2. And the same thing does happen that for example, that if I'm playing some of the Chinese games which are based on a deep understanding of the Chinese culture and specific Chinese history, I'm usually at loss because I don't have that cultural reference matrix there which I can use to evoke these and offload these sort of senses of space, place.
Okay, do we still have some questions? Maybe Janne gets the last one.
A simple one. I mean, I'm interested in the differences between space and place. For example, if you think about, let's say, Super Mario World 1-1. Is it first a space and then it becomes a place afterwards?
Yes.
And yeah, okay, good. If we go like more difficult examples, perhaps Pac-Man?
Yes.
Space War?
Yes. Okay, so it is, when you look at the indicators of places, here. is that these are, in all of your examples, that these are the ones that then matter. So it is that in Super Mario case, it is the sort of identity and the self-motivated and self-organized actions and traces of memory. Especially how Mario is building the identity there, how it is built as the Mario character and also as you as a player actions there. Versus that it also contains the traces of memory. That it remembers you. It is used as when you play the game, you remember what has happened. You remember that there were other places. You remember that there's continuation, there's progression, there's change. And those are which create then the sense of place versus sort of more than space. And then in the space wars, for example, you lose some of that sense of identities and especially the traces of memory. Same thing with Pac-Man. It has some of these ones, but then it is not as strong as in Super Mario. And then if you compare it to Tetris, where Tetris pretty much has very low doses of all of this. And that's why there's the space and place.
Okay, thank you, Jussi. That
Well,
was
thank
very
you.
insightful. Yeah.
Well, thank you.